Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another round of World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Don Arleth. President Maia Sandu said on Monday that Moldovans had won a first difficult battle that would determine their future after a referendum on their EU aspirations was on course to produce a thin yes majority of just over 50%, almost 50.5%. Speaking at a news briefing, the Moldovan leader said that an outside attempt to buy votes and influence the referendum amounted to an attack on the country's sovereignty, and that Moldova needed to do more to combat corruption. Now, another key election in Georgia is coming up this weekend, which some describe as the last chance for Georgia to correct its path and steer away from Moscow and towards the EU. Now, joining me here to explore these parallels is Former Moldovan Ambassador to the United Nations, Vlad Lupan. Hello, sir. Thank you for joining us. And Associate...
Thank you for the invitation.
And Associate Professor Grigol from the Caucasus University, Grigol Julukhidze. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you for joining me, and welcome. Now, Ambassador Lupan, I'd like to start with you in Moldova first. So after we see the results for incumbent President Maia Sandu, as well as this razor-thin margin of choosing yes to enshrine EU accession into the Moldovan constitution, what are your overall thoughts after the events of yesterday?
Right. Well, there was no secret about the fact that Russian political parties have been involved in vote buying. An investigation that went undercover inside that political party organization proved it. So there is no doubt about that. It's not a questionable matter. A number of journalists have investigated that from within the organizations. They have proven independently from the government that such a vote buying was taking place, and it was massive. So the expectation, looking at the opinion polls before the elections, was that because of the European Union was so popular, the referendum is going to pass with an absolute majority of the votes, or at least with a high percentage. The referendum was meant, because of its popularity, because of the popularity of the European Union, to be a boost for the incumbent President Maia Sandu during these elections. As a matter of fact, the goal of these elections, because of that, was to start the campaign for the 2025 elections. General elections where Maia Sandu's former party, now in government, the party PAS, is going to compete against the Russian speakers. That was the expectation. The outcome was that presumably the vote buying, massive vote buying that was reported by the independent media in various cases, not only in that one political party, but in another as well. The number of people who were undecided and then they swing voters that went against the referendum has changed the outcome. If there was no external interference, there is a certain confidence that the outcome of the referendum would have been much more in favor of the integration of the European Union. And still, despite the massive vote buying, the referendum passed by a super slim margin, but it did pass. So it gives you a perspective that the reality is different. The reality is most probably in favor of such a referendum, as many, many opinion polls have shown.
Now, Grigol, you're sitting in Georgia. You guys are facing a very key election coming up, the general parliamentary elections this weekend. Looking at what just transpired in Moldova, what are your impressions? What are some of the parallels that you see that Moldova just went through in comparison with your own country?
Well, in case of Georgians, nothing new has happened because we perfectly know how the Russian modus operandi works. Russians are disseminating various conspiracy theories, demonizing the West, and hitting democratic values. Unfortunately, currently, the government is sharing their narratives. And if you see their declarations and statements, you will immediately find out the similarities. Unfortunately, that's the reality. However, the thing that gives me an optimism is an extremely pro-Western attitudes of the vast majority of Georgians. And I'm pretty sure that the same tactics will not work effectively in Georgia. And Russians understand that quite well. But in this case, Russians have different, I would say, advantage. The government, which, as I have already mentioned, is almost directly following the propagandistic and political narratives of the Kremlin. That's the main problem. As for the current situation, well, I would avoid to make any predictions about the upcoming elections because the situation is very unpredictable. But one thing is clear, that we will see the highest rank of the activeness of the voters, because we expect that more than 70% of Georgians will participate in the elections. And as many voters participate in the elections, the chances to defeat the government increases in every case. But the biggest problem is the expectations that the government will implement various non-democratic manipulations, and this is the main challenge that the opposition might face.
In terms of the opposition, would you say that they are more united this time around than say in the past?
Well, they are more united than a couple of months ago, but still the authority and the general image of the opposition is very weak. Mm-hmm. That's the reality. And the only reason why Georgians will vote for them in the most cases is the fact that they do not want to support the government, which has become the I would say the implementer of the Russian political will in this country.
Now, Ambassador Lupan, if we look at Georgia, they have already made a move to enshrine EU accession into their constitution. Moldova just barely got that through now. But we see in Georgia, with the Georgia Dream Party, that their pro-Kremlin stance, well, they completely ignore the provision that's been inserted into their constitution. Is there concern or perhaps a fear that in Moldova that could also, this latest referendum could also end up the same way?
Of course, there is a concern that the pro-Russian political parties are going, if they are going to come to power in 2025, they will attempt to revert that referendum. And the reason for that is well known. Moscow does not want the former Soviet space to join the European Union even. We're not even talking about NATO. We're talking about the European Union, which is a non-military bloc. Mm-hmm. The Russian Federation still does not want to do that. And the reason for that is very simple. They see the former Soviet Union indeed as their sphere of influence, at least as a sphere of influence, if not, as we can see in Ukraine, they're invading Ukraine to maintain it's not just as a sphere of influence, part of its own territory. They're swallowing it. They're recreating a sort of a new imperial identity in that particular area. And Moldova belongs to that area. Georgia belongs to that area from their perspective. The signals were very clear. Even in 2022, in March of 2022, Moldova has appeared on one of the attack maps of the Russian Federation, which was later confirmed in a month, I believe, by one of the Russian generals. So, of course, Moldova is very important for the Russian Federation, not only from that point of view, but also because Moldova is a hub, a transportation hub for Ukraine now. Eliminating one of the transportation routes for the Ukrainians now will weaken Ukraine. Therefore, winning elections in Moldova is very important for the Russian Federation as well. So there are multiple reasons why the Russian Federation is involved. Of course, they do not want to lose in their mind what doesn't actually belong to them, despite the fact that the Moldovans want to join the European Union. They don't care about that. they have their own interest in mind, and they will attempt to use the Russian political parties to change the situation in the Republic of Moldova. That's why this referendum was a constitutional referendum to change the constitution to join the European Union, to make it irreversible. That's the goal, irreversibility of European choice. And of course, for that very reason, the Russian Federation involved itself so massively with vote buying to stop that.
Very briefly, your expectations for the upcoming second round for the runoff on November 3rd?
We see about 42% voting for Maya Sandu now, around over 20% for Stoyanoglu. The next 5 candidates under Stoyanoglu are essentially, in one form or another, either directly or indirectly supported by the Russian Federation. So there will be some transfer of votes from those candidates towards Stoyanoglu. So we're going to come very close, but not all of them are going to transfer, because this is not just a purely mathematical transfer of the votes. It's going to be a difficult choice. There is one more thing. During the during the previous presidential elections, people came out in the second round even more massively in the first ones. So let's see how that works. That time, it helped Maya Sandu.
Okay, yeah, potentially turnout could be much more. Well, gentlemen, we have run out of time. Former Moldovan Ambassador to the United Nations, Vlad Lupan, thank you for joining us. And Grigol Julukhidze, Associate Professor at the Caucasus University, thank you very much. And Grigol, I know we'll be in touch with you very, very soon as you approach these big elections coming up in Georgia. Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.